You know, sometimes it really does seem like life is a constant battle of human versus technology. And in many ways, that's rather appropriate for today's video, because today's video is about ships which incorporate not just human technology, not just an allied alien race's technology, but an ancient race's technology which has been adapted by an enemy as well. And a few other bits and pieces gathered along the way as well. It's rather an interesting class. And in many ways, this class is probably. How do I put this politely? The closest to how I suspect we would actually build spaceships. Whenever I see them in movies and various science fiction programs, and they're all these sweeping, beautiful, graceful lines, I know those are ships which have been designed by artistic directors, not procurement committees who have to deal with politicians who are going, but do you need to spend that money? One of the reasons modern ships often look like they do, and get things like fitted for, not with, is because you always have a battle to balance the budget. When we talk about modern affairs on bilge pumps, you'll have often heard my colleague Drac and myself and Jamie all talking about the fact that it seems that the current Western procurement that it is the tail wagging the dog. Whereas in the 1920s and 1930s and even into the 1950s and some to an extent the 60s, and definitely before that, the procuring organisations would turn around and go, we want to build 18 cruisers. And they would procure 18 cruisers. These days, they turn around and say, well, with current infrastructure and industry limitations, we can only procure this many ships. So build more slips. Well, you know, industry won't. Why won't industry? Because we won't keep ordering them, so it won't be profitable for them to do it. So you mean they're not going to make enough profit from just building the ships themselves and charging that much? They have to be making continual, ongoing, massive amount of profit in order to justify increasing industry to meet the national security needs of the nation, which are their biggest customer. Yeah, there seems something slightly wrong going on there. Well, welcome to the Daedalus class, which, well, honestly, they should probably look like the Lego construction. The Lego construction actually looks pretty darn good, and I have great props to whoever built this one. I would love a Lego model Daedalus to build. I have looked into seeing if there's a model I could actually buy. Turns out it isn't. But the point about this class, and one of the really interesting things you see, is the Stargate Command, you would think would be something which is going to get unlimited funding. They're going to get unlimited support. They are quite literally defending Earth from invasion. They are the first line of defense because they are the primary tool going out there and gathering intelligence and information about our potential enemies and bringing it back so we can better prepare ourselves. And yet, the moment there's a chance to cut funding, the funding is being cut. Trying to mothball it. It hasn't produced enough results right now. It hasn't produced this or that right now. Perhaps if we cut off the gate, we can ignore the rest of the world. Or perhaps we should transfer it to a different bureaucracy, because this bureaucracy we don't have enough levers of control over. Or all sorts of things. Ongoing struggles. One of the most interesting facets of Stargate Command and Stargate as a program series versus Star Trek and Star Wars and all the other programs. I suppose Andromeda really doesn't have the chance to get into it, because there isn't really much of an organisation for him to be dealing with the bureaucracy of. And once there is, then that falls to the bad guys. But leaving that to one side, it's an ongoing, realistic idea of some of the issues which you face in an armed forces and running an armed forces, which makes it a really interesting program. It also makes these ships really interesting. It makes the Daedalus class really, really interesting, because they are compromises, and you can tell they are compromises. They have 16 missile tubes on them. 16 missiles. 16 VLS. And it's one of those things which always bugs me, because however big, and I'll be getting into the size debate we think the Daedalus class are, those are pretty darn massive missiles. We get the idea and impression that they can build new ones aboard and assemble them, but to launch more than the 16 they originally come with, but still 16 doesn't seem that many. And you can tell this very clearly in certain battle scenes where it's kind of like the Falklands War, where a commander of one launches, we're firing 2 missiles, 1, 2, and then fires another 2. And the lesson from the Falklands War was all these captains who had spent years, and commanders who spent years firing missiles in exercises, 1, 2, and then they stop. And then remind ourselves, we're in a war. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You fire everything. You don't go, you know what? I'm going to hold on to my missiles, because sending them in pairs is, is the sensible thing to do. No, you don't do that, because the whole point of missile strikes, especially when you're dealing in ship battles, is volume of fire to overwhelm the defences. So you've got 16. That's not even enough, really, to overwhelm the defences on a Daedalus class. Probably not even enough to really overwhelm the defences on a Prometheus class. Yes, the warheads, any of them hit, they're doing severe damage. I will say that. They hit, they're doing severe damage. But the thing is, that's not a lot of missiles. 16 just isn't. Not when you're a spaceship with 360-degree railguns. That could theoretically spin on your axis to keep firing them and do all sorts of hijinks and all sorts of maneuvers and blast out all sorts of, well, jamming signals. The BC-304s start off with the BC-303 program, and I would actually say Daedalus probably starts out as a sister to the Prometheus. In fact, that's really what... I also want to call him Robert McKay, but Rodney McKay. I know it's Rodney McKay. Says, at one point, he describes the Daedalus as a sister ship to the Prometheus. But, as you can see, they start off with a vessel which looks like this. It evolves through this design to what eventually comes about. And the whole idea is to incorporate technology to develop something which can provide the systems in the fire support you need for planetary defense, but also for reaching out and affecting events around the galaxy. Here is a small little issue with the Stargate. Stargates are great. They can allow you to do all sorts of diplomatic, reinforcement, extraction missions. They are wonderful, but they're also a single point of entry and single point of failure. So, on a really secure mission, or a mission where you have to go in heavy, you need a ship. It's not as fast as a Stargate to get there, but you need a ship. You need the ship to be able to do the extraction when the Stargate's blocked. You need the ship to be able to do the fire support when the Stargate's blocked. You need the ship to get around the bottleneck that is the Stargate. The Stargate is a wonderful idea, but very few people seem to have considered defending it. It's one of the interesting things. The Earth, or Tauri as they're called in universe, by people outside of Earth, do actually defend their Stargate. Very few other races seem to have done so. It seems to be quite a rare asset to actually think of going, you know what? The enemy can attack me through this. I will put a gate here. Or some sort of iris. Force field. Interesting enough, the ancients, the Lanteans, who are a precursor race, who are sort of billed as the Stargate builders, but I'm never 100% sure of that. They certainly do, how do I put it, expand the network, and certainly do build gates themselves. But I often wonder with Lantean technology whether or not there were precursors, and especially to them, especially once you find the origin story of the Ori, who come in later in the series and are a big part of the BC-304 stories, whether or not they are fully part of it, or whether there are other races prior to them that they learnt from. Vitals. Well, this is according to DVDs. So this is the official stuff. Length, 200 to 225 meters. Okay. Width, 90 to 95 meters. Height, depth, 70 to 75 meters. Maximum speed, 75,000 kilometers a second, or 150, let's be honest, 150 million meters per second. You do not need to remember the rest. It's a sort of rounding error. 25% to 50% of light speed of light. Engines, maneuvering thrusters, Asgard hyperdrives, and alternate reality drives. Now, I always picture the Asgard hyperdrive as kind of like a turbine. It's dependent on the power that's coming through to it for how efficient it is. And I always think it's kind of like the British ships in World War II, which are fitted with turbines which are in many ways more powerful than they need to be, i.e. capable of taking far higher powered, far more high pressure boilers than they're actually fitted with. And this is a very simple reason. They've done this very efficiently, and they do work very efficiently, but they could have taken a higher pressure boiler. And the reason they're not fitted that is because it's felt that if you fit a higher pressure boiler, that would take time to implement across the fleet, it would take time to train up, and then you would have to make other changes, and you would end up with problems. So the idea was they needed to get a fleet in service by 1942. They went with the best boilers that they had already in stock, and the best turbines they could get. The fact that those turbines could take an upgrade later of boilers is neither here nor there. That was an option, which was for future-proofing, but not really considered that at that point. Well, these engines are kind of like that, because if they're fueled by Naquadah generators, they are very capable. And they will get them all the way to the Pegasus Galaxy in 18 days. However, if you stick a 0-point module, which is a Lantean system, up to them, that will take them 4 days. Asgard Power Core will also similarly shorten the trip by increasing the power. They even came up with an alternate reality drive system which was powered by subspace capacitors, but that was Rodney McKay when he was going really, really nuts, and I think that was also a cheap way to fill an episode. It added something to the storyline, but let's be honest, that episode is just a very, very cheap story. Mostly about ice cream. Shielding. Asgard shields. Nice to have them. Naquadah Trinium Alloy. For the hull, sensor systems, full Asgard sensor array, as well as Tauri or human targeting systems and Earth targeting systems. And also some Gual tech as well. Navigation system. Computer navigational systems, so star mapping. Armament, 4 Asgard plasma beam weapons, 32 rail guns, 16 VLS missile troops. This seems to be the original fit. And please note, the 4 Asgard plasma beam weapons come in later. Cruise missiles, Mark III, Mark 8 and Mark 9 nuclear missiles. Horizon weapons platform, on Apollo at least, possibly others. Let's be honest, it's run by an air force and they do like bombers. Complement, 8 to 16 F-302 fighter interceptors, crew 200, minimum 4, other systems, Asgard transporters, long-range transmitter, all these things. That's great systems. Let's start off with, you can tell these are ships designed by someone who's talking to Air Force liaison. Why? Because if your minimum crew is 4, how are you going to maintain a watch? You probably need at least one person in engineering at all times, and you need one person on the bridge. That's probably minimum for a watch requirements. And 4 isn't going to do that, because if you're doing that 24 hours a day for however long, you're going to kill them if you're doing that with 4 people. You're talking 12 hours on, 12 hours off, never getting any break. So the reality is you probably need... I would say minimum crew really should be about 8. Yes, it's being flown by 4 in emergencies, but I wouldn't call that the minimum crew. Minimum crew you would actually want to pragmatically operate with is going to be about 8. To guarantee some overlap, to guarantee some covers, and give people roughly, 8 hours on, 16 hours off with an interchange. Let's start off with go through the rest. Complement, roughly 200 on a ship which is 200 and 225 metres by 1995 metres and is going to be dealing with an air group of 8 to 16 aircraft. Well, that's good. I presume you've got a lot of automation, a lot of computer systems doing everything for you then. But you've got 8 to 16 aircraft? That's great. That's a squadron. Yeah, you're carrying a squadron. If anyone had talked to anyone who's ever run a carrier air group, or knew anything about running carrier air groups, and was thinking this is a ship which is going to be on its own in the middle of space, so especially while we're only going to have a handful in service, so they're usually going to be on their own, therefore they need the minimum requirements to run a basic CAP, Combat Air Patrol, or I suppose CSP, Combat Space Patrol. Probably a CSP, Combat Space Patrol. Well, if you look at the history, the British and the Americans and the French navies have all done extensive work on this. And all have come to the same figure. Minimum number of aircraft you need to do it is 18. So, minimum number to run a CAP and sustain one in operations is 18 aircraft. So ideally you need 24 to 32. Because if you also want it to be able to mount a strike and do all those things, then you need those aircraft. You also need interchange, extra air, flight crew, all sorts of things to maintain those things. Because at a certain point, it's not the aircraft, machinery, and the service hours which are going to break you down. It's going to be the pilots, the air crew. But still, servicing those aircraft, if you were trying to run a CAP with less than 18 aircraft, you would need a humongous number of people to be maintaining those aircraft. Because, let's say you have a job which takes servicing an aircraft. Let's say it takes 20 man-hours for every hour of flight. 20 crew hours, 20 maintainer hours for every hour of flight. Well, that means if you are cycling through aircraft, you're maintaining 4 up in space at any one time, 4 on alert, okay, then you're only able to do maintenance on 8 at any one point. They're probably going to cycle through, so it'll be them sort of coming back, etc. You would want them to be in space for at least 2 to 3 hours to make it worthwhile to come back. So let's say they do 2 hours. 2-hour CAP patrols. We're doing this all nice and easy sums. So they're in 2 hours. Then it's 2 hours to come. 2 hours to come back as sort of on alert status. So that's 4-hour status. It takes 10 crew hours. 20 crew hours, probably more accurate, per hour of flight. So that means you've got 40 hours for each aircraft. You've now got 4 aircraft. That's 160 hours. And if they're on 2-hour rotations, think about that. If they're on 2-hour rotations, so 2, 2, and then 4 more back, you've got to get that 160 hours done in 4. You're going to need at least 20 people running around. Oh, and they're going to need to be going 24/7, so you're going to need 80 just to maintain a cap in terms of maintainers. And that's me being very simplistic. People are going to come in and correct me and go, well, you need also the weapons people, you need this people, you need that, you need all these different specialisms. You do. And you need a lot more aircraft than that if you're going to maintain a sensible cap. And a ship which is on its own is going to need to maintain a cap. A CSP. It's going to need to. Why? Because a ship which is on its own has no backup. So it needs to have something up there watching its back. Especially in a space timeline where you have enemies with cloaking systems, where you can be orbiting planets and they can be hiding behind moons. There are tons of scenarios where you could find yourself ambushed very quickly, and it's especially true when you're talking about dealing with the Wraith in the Pegasus galaxy, who have hive ships which are basically carriers teeming with thousands of fighters and darts. When you're taking on the Ori, they talk about using the F-302s as defensive aircraft. This means you need to actually have enough to do that job, and also need to mount a strike, which is where you get the numbers of 24 to 32 from. It just makes sense from a maintenance perspective and an operations perspective. And we haven't even got into the fact that they're not including any sort of shuttle or helicopter equivalent. Now, yes, you can point out, go, well, they've got the transportation rings, they've got the Asgard transporters. What do they need a form of shuttlecraft for? Well, this is going to sound strange, but what happens if you cannot use the transporters? I.e., when you find your people are aboard a shielded ship and you can't extract them that way, or a shielded station and you can't extract them that way. The transportation rings and the transporters also all have different issues about getting through certain levels of radiation, certain levels of jamming. If you need to extract people, you want the ability to extract them at all times. And if you are going to have fighter interceptors flying off, you need recovery ships. You need something that can go out and grab them and bring them back, especially when you have such a small pool of them that you are dependent on every single one. The fact that they don't have any search and recovery assets. Yes, I know, the F-302 has its own grappling hooks. Great. Wonderful. That's not really a recovery asset, is it? So let's consider their lengths. As they're currently positioned, 225 meters means even at their longest, they are shorter than any single one of these ships. They're fatter than them. They're definitely fatter than them, but they're shorter. By a significant margin in the case of the Nimitz class. Now, this is strange. And yes, they have a far smaller crew, but also think about, again, the crew which this has, which are mostly due to operating its air wing, which is far bigger, I know, I do understand that, but also its nuclear reactors and the watch crews you need for them. Now, again, this might sound strange, and this may again be the sort of the service that they're getting their advice from in their terms of their experience and how they operate. But if you're dealing with a ship going on a long route away, you're going to need to budget a lot of logistics, a lot of personnel to maintain the logistics, and you're going to need to budget a lot for engineering and maintenance on board. It's going to need to be self-sufficient, which means it's going to need to cover personnel, carry enough personnel that if they have people go down through illness or casualties in war, or casualties in operations or war, they can still do their job. This again affects the crew size. It's one of those things when I'm looking at this crew scale, I'm going, do you have replicator technology? I do realize replicators in this particular world are not the same as they are in Star Trek, but I'm talking about Star Trek level replicators here. If you don't, and I know there is one episode where Carter does manage to use the Asgard transporters to develop that sort of system. If you don't have that tech, well, you're going to need a lot more people. Probably 4 times a day, because of the watch system. You are maintaining their showers. You are maintaining their clothes. You are maintaining their education. Because again, these are serving military personnel. Just because they're on a spaceship, which is part of a secret program, doesn't mean they aren't going to have to take part in professional military development, which means they're going to have coursework, which means they're going to have to be dealing with all the requirements which come from that. I know I'm being very much realistic here, but this is the point. When you design ships which look like this and are set in a real world setting, you have to expect to start thinking in terms of real world terms and real world operations. Which is why this interests me so much. This came out a few years later, and it was put out by some of the people who were involved in the project, and it was what they felt the Daedalus class were. A length of 650 meters. That's starting to make much more sense. A width of 367 meters. That's almost kind of like a Nimitz class with 2 more Nimitz class. If we go back to that figure, you know, that starts to make sense. Height 135 meters. That makes a lot more sense, although that does mean, well, it means that they've got 27 decks, because it's going to be roughly 5 meters each for each deck versus 19. Now, why do I say roughly 5 meters a deck? Well, because whilst you've got the space we think about of us wandering through in the middle, which is going to be roughly 3 meters, because you have people who are usually 6 foot plus, sort of around 6 foot thing, which is 2 meters. So if you want clearance, etc., it's going to be 3 meters. And if you look at the deck spaces, most of them seem to be 3 meters. So plenty of clearance. You're also going to need conduits, space of conduits and cables and all the things which make the ship work to run around the ship, which means there's going to be a meter above and below roughly each deck space. There you go. That's your 5 meters per rough deck. 26 twin-barreled mini railguns. Ooh, the railguns have been enhanced. They've gone from 32 single gun systems to 26 twin. That makes sense, and does provide a lot more firepower. Still have those 16 missile tubes, but let's be honest, if that's now 650 meters long, and those missile tubes, as we can see on the front, look like this. Those are sodding great big missiles. They really are great big missiles. But again, why are you only carrying 16 of them? At this point, make your ship slightly fatter and carry 24 of them in the 24 launchers. You know, yes, you can reload and change them around and put new ones to launch them out of there, but still, you'd want more than 16. 4 Asgard plasma beam weapon emitters. Cool. They're carrying railguns and plasma beam weapon motors. This is a good idea. I'll be getting into this. And you can see a picture here of the twin railguns. Looking mighty fine. 214 officers and crew. Still kind of short on the personnel. Even if you are taking only 16 fifth 302s, and 16 is a lot better than 8, it's still kind of short. And also, those are huge hangar spaces. They take an entire Wraith, well, not quite cruiser, but definitely Wraith yacht, which is not exactly a small vessel, fits inside them, along with 302s. So there's some real problems here going on. Engines, Asgard Hyperdrive and Serikin Non-Iron Sublight Drive. Cool. That is definitely a lot of capability. And definitely going to allow them to get going quite quickly. And makes a lot more sense because, again, here is another thing for scale. An actual battle cruiser. Another battle cruiser. HMS Renown. My favourite of the battle cruisers. Let's consider her length. 228 metres. Well, 228.7 metres between the perpendiculars. 242 metres overall. Does it make sense that this ship, which is a spaceship, yes, I know it's built to the cheapest price possible by the committee, is going to be that much smaller? But also, please let's consider things like here, the crew is roughly 1,000. Now, I'm not saying that the crew would be that much bigger, but you're at least thinking there should be a marine detachment aboard. For one thing, what happens if you turn up to a planet and you need to send down ground troops? You need to have a force which you can send. Probably be reinforced company strength in total. That would seem more sensible for this scale of ship, but maybe you might go for light battalion strength. And again, this is where the lack of a shuttle really starts to cause issues, because whilst yes, you can use the transporters and everything to get down, once you're down, you're then having to transport her around everywhere, and actually having something which can overfly and drop troops off is a psychological advantage. It allows you to appear with overwhelming force, and the shuttle itself provides firepower and support. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's a case of I know why you don't have one, because it's another thing you have to develop. But the strange thing is, by the time these comes in service, start to come into service, they're starting to be in regular connectivity with Atlantis, which has the puddle jumpers, which are these little sort of shuttle ships, which can go through the Stargate, and it would seem sensible, especially as they've already played around with a Gwald version of a gate ship, which could actually go through a gate. Through the Stargate network and make use of it, to have built their own Stargate systems. It would have been sensible. It would have certainly been useful for them to do so. And it would have been an advantageous for them to have such an operational capability for when they are deploying. Because again, this ship could go and position itself in the middle of space, it could find a Stargate, whether it's on a planet or in a etc., wherever, and start sending out teams via the gate, using these little ships, and have a wide area effect without it being able to be traced back to Earth. It would seem an obvious advantageous play. No, they don't. One of the other interesting things that goes on is where exactly is the bridge. It moves around. My often suspicion is it's in this bit, which you can sort of see forward. Forward of the sort of the R superstructure. That would seem a sensible place for it to me, but it does seem to move around. Also, the tower seems to move around occasionally on the back in different models, but, well, I can see why that might happen. I always treat that as sort of communications sensor mast more than anything else. Right then. And as I said, these are the stats for HMS Renown. So it gives you an idea of when you're talking about a battle cruiser, what you should be looking at something that is. And again, it's that sort of roughly 1,000 crew. That makes sense for something this size. Especially if it is 650. I would be expecting, roughly as said, 300 Marines. I would be expecting air group maintainers, etc. Well, I'd be expecting at least 32, especially if it's this size, fighter interceptors, and let's say 16 of the puddle jumpers to be there, and with 16 of the fighter, the F-302s in each bay, and 8 of the puddle jumpers, so they have them sort of evenly each side distributed. That would make sense to me. That would be the sensible thing for their capabilities they bring to the table. So you'd expect about 300 flight crew, maintainers, etc. in order to keep those all operating and available 24/7. You'd then be needing all the personnel that you need to run the ship, run the watches, and feed everyone. Clothe everyone. Take care of everyone. Because there is no one else to do so. Who are they going to call if they break down? The AA? And I'd have thought this would have been the first lesson taken away from the Prometheus when she had her issues. Whenever she had problems, they had nothing else to go and support her. So you make a bigger ship which has more redundancy in it, but it's also so you can have more crew to keep so you have more experience and more knowledge to fix and maintain things. The really big surprise with all these ships is that the people who I would most expect to see crewing them, submariners, never seem to turn up. I know it's the Air Force are running the Stargate program. I do realise that. But once you get into putting something like this together, I would expect maybe the commanders to come from the Air Force, because they're part of the original Stargate program and understand it, and understand all the systems going on. But I wouldn't be surprised if the logistics officers and the people running the food and all the stuff came from the Navy and came from the submarine service. Because they would actually understand the reality of what they're delivering. Because that's the closest it is. It's going to be, this is a sealed environment. You're in it for the next X number of months. Look after everyone. Yeah, you're in space and it's all cool and lovely, but after a certain point, you're gonna be going, I'm in an enclosed space, trapped with all these people. Some of whom I like, some of whom I don't. How good's the food? And it's one of those things when you truly start looking and thinking about building some sort of ship like this in our current world setting, which is what Stargate really is about. You start to think about all the skills you're going to be bringing together. Now, yes, you might well be using Air Force pilots, but those flight decks, I would be screaming to the U.S. Navy for their carrier flight deck crews, because that's who I'd want in there maintaining and fitting out and leading that process, especially until we got to the point at which they were self-generating their own personnel. This is the thing. Once they start generating their own personnel, coming through and coming up the ranks, that is fine. When you have reached that level of critical mass that you are generating people internally who have experience operating ships, you do not need to go and pluck from other services their various experiences. But when you are generating the first dozen or so of these ships, you are going to need to go and get those people who already have the relevant skills from the various services they belong to. Now, As mentioned earlier, the hyperdrive, when powered by Naquadah, the ships are able to voyage from Earth to Atlantis in 18 days. When powered by Asgard power cores or Lantean zero-point module, it's roughly 4 days, which is great. But let's consider one of the ships, the Daedalus itself, is regularly doing trips backwards and forwards to the Pegasus galaxy. It's regularly going backwards and forwards, which is great. It's necessary, especially, well, whilst you have the midway station, which does theoretically allow you to connect into between the two gate networks and easily get home from the Atlantis to Earth. It's lost quite early on, and it's always easier to move stuff forwards and backwards between Atlantis in the Pegasus galaxy and Earth by ship. If you're going to do that, it's 18 days. Well, let's put it this way. That's probably 2 days, 2 to 4 days at Earth, 18 days, 2 to 4 days at Atlantis, and then 18 days back, at least. So that's the minimum trip you're looking at is a 44-day round trip. For most of that journey, you will be between galaxies and a long, long way from anyone. By the way, at the end of that trip, when you're in Pegasus Galaxy, you are going to be faced with an enemy which has been around longer than you have existed as a planet, which has been winning wars for longer than you have been around, and comes heavy with everything. Do not understand the concept of, ooh, shall we bring half measures? No, they bring it all. And you're taking a ship which has only 16 fighters aboard and a couple of hundred crew. You're brave. You're brave. Now, the thing is, we do learn that they can take more. We do know they can take more when they turn up with reinforcements for Atlantis and at various other points. So the 200 crew figures start to sort of be moved around. And this is why I think perhaps sometimes, and this again comes with science fiction, they go, 200 is a large number. Well, 200 sounds like a large number until you start thinking about that's going to be maintaining a watch over 24 hours over how many Naquadah enhanced nuclear reactors, how many aircraft have to be maintained in operational status at all times, ready to go the moment you pop out of hyperdrive to provide cap. What kind of positions are you watching in terms of the bridge? What kind of positions are you watching in terms of the engine? Do you have to have a security patrol wandering around? Probably, because you probably have secure stuff you need to keep safe. So you probably want to have a patrol and some guards at various points, because even if you do trust all your own crew, this is a universe which has Gwald and various other systems in it which can actually mind control people, even who are unwilling, but so would otherwise pass all your security tests, but have been taken over and turned into a host. So you probably want that security patrol wandering around, and you start going through numbers, and you start that suddenly that 200. Well, that drops down dramatically. 214 sounds like a lot. Well, that takes it down to roughly 71 in each of the 3 watches, if they're doing 8 hours on, 16 hours off. And it just gets worse from there. So, yeah, even a crew of roughly 300, we're talking about 100 on at any one point, but again, I was saying that with sort of overall crew of roughly 1,000, where the Marines would be doing most of the internal security work. So, yeah, you'd have 100 of those probably sitting around on duty as a reaction team, and as the people actually at guarding posts and actually wandering around, you'd have roughly 100 crew on duty and roughly 100 maintainers on duty at any one point. Yes, you do surge when in combat. You go to everyone awake and everyone to your duty stations. It's action stations, man them. But you don't want to be doing that 24 hours a day. and you're going into a war zone. Daedalus especially. Daedalus spends her whole entire career going into a war zone. The first time we are literally introduced to this ship is when she turns up over Atlantis and is fighting the Wraith. She is arming and protecting Atlantis. That's what she's deployed to do. They can't get to there any other way. They stick a 0-point module in her. She gets there in 4 days thanks to the 0-point module. With the help of her Asgard engineering expert, which she carries for the first 2 years. She turns up. She is one of the best entry scenes I have ever seen a ship do on science fiction. I mean, literally, I fell in love with this class the moment I saw the ship enter service and went, oh, that's good. That looks like something which has really been actually thought through. Admittedly, then I read the DVD stats on their size and went, what kind of... This is the trouble when someone like me watches the television, because... And I expect anyone who's a veteran or a naval historian, anyone who's had an interest in this, also gets the same thing when, or every actually, in your area of expertise, when you're watching television and they hand wave you TV World it, and you're going, but that's not how it works. Please stop. Stop saying those words. They do not mean what you think they mean, and they do not work like that. And it's hurting my eyes, and my ears, and my soul. It's hurting my soul. More than you know. Ah, well. Now, occasionally, Apollo joined her in the trips to the Pegasus Galaxy, and once or twice, even Odyssey took it on. But most of the time, she did it. Which is going to take a tremendous toll on these ships. Constantly going backwards and forwards between 2 galaxies at maximum hyperdrive is going to take a toll on the ship. They're going to need maintenance. They're going to need to be looked after, repaired. There's also the kind of interesting thing of their, how do I put this politely? The ranks of the people involved. They have a full colonel as commander. They have a lieutenant colonel as a navigator. Lieutenant colonel as the pilot. Tons of majors and captains aboard. This is going to sound terrible, but if you have a lieutenant colonel aboard, the odds are they're the XO, maybe the chief engineer, probably not the pilot. You might have a senior pilot who's a major, and a senior navigator who's a major, if you're going through Air Force ranks. But the odds are the other ones, they're going to be their team leads of your pilots. Because again, you're going to need more than one pilot because of the watch system and because of the fact that they have to sleep. Now, one of the early things you're introduced to about these ships are railguns. And railguns are pretty darn cool. But again, they are a feature of this whole universe in that the other powers are going for increasingly high tech, always pushing the envelope with the technology, always going for the highest techie approach, which is lovely. But it doesn't always work. And as we'll be seeing, railguns are reliable. Railguns in this universe are incredibly reliable. And one of the class, the George Hammond, does something really spectacular when it's severely damaged because its railguns are still working. The railguns will work. Now, this is another reason though why I think the 650 meters mark is probably more accurate on the length than the 330 odd meters, 300 odd plus meters on the width is probably more accurate as well, because if we consider 500 rounds per minute, and therefore they can empty a 10,000 round magazine in 20 minutes. Well, if you had 32 guns, and you did that, you would probably be carrying a lot more than 20 minutes firing. You'd need to be carrying probably about an hour's level of firing. So you need to carry 3 magazines. So that's 30,000 rounds times 32. If you are starting to look at me and go, but Alex, that's 960,000 rounds of ammunition. Yes, it is, and that's a lot of space. However, that's nothing when we get to the more realistic 26 twin barrel systems, which would certainly look appropriate with this firing arc as we speak. See here. 26 twin barreled, that's 52 times 30,000. Now you're getting worried. 52 times 30,000 is, well, 3 times it. 3 times 52 is 156. Times 156 by 10,000. You have 1.56 million. Now, considering in space terms, these are the equivalent of your 40mm guns. And considering you are nowhere without support, you are nowhere, you have no support, you're a ship on your own, that seems to me to be a conservative estimate of what you would carry. I am being conservative by saying they'd have 3 magazines. Conservative. If I was building these ships, I would want a ready store of 3 magazines per railgun next to the railguns, ready to go straight in without me worrying about it. And I would want another 6 per railgun stored somewhere in my ship, ready to go, or the ability to manufacture the rounds. Find me the nearest asteroid and let me mine it. In which case I need the space and space, the personnel, and the capabilities to do that. Which again is going to affect the numbers of people I have on me. Odyssey. Oh. The Earth's flagship after the Prometheus was destroyed, mainly because Daedalus was doing the far more important mission. Okay, Prometheus gets lost. They no longer have a... dang. Right, you'd think then immediately they go, well, protecting Earth is the most important duty we've got to have, so we'll take the experienced ship we have, which is Daedalus, which is going backwards, and we'll send the Odyssey to take over that role. No, someone actually has been sensible. Someone thinks, hang on, the Daedalus is used to going into the war zones, we'll use that for that. The Odyssey is here and available, we'll use her for this, and we'll work with her. And she does well. She does really well. She goes through commanding officers, how do I put this politely, quite quickly. She has Colonel Paul Emerson in 2006, Lieutenant Colonel Samantha Carter for a mission between 2006 and 2007. Then Colonel Ian Davidson takes over. Then Major General Henry Landry takes over for the particular battle. And then Lieutenant Colonel Cameron Mitchell for another battle. I would honestly say, for Prometheus itself, the smaller vessel, the 303, a Lieutenant Colonel probably makes sense as a commanding officer. Once you're dealing with a vessel the size of Odyssey, especially, I know on their crewing of 200, yes, a Lieutenant Colonel makes sense, but if you're dealing with something of this size, which you're talking about in terms of being a battle cruiser, you are dealing with a full captain equivalent, which is a colonel. That would make most sense. Only under exceptional circumstances would it be anyone else. And I would actually add to that. I would say it would be very remiss for anything with the rank of flagship to not be carrying a flag officer and appropriate staff, especially if you're going to be operating with allies. Because if you do that, you are placing even more burden on the crew. Because think about it. A ship has certain needs of personnel. Those personnel are assigned and doing those duties. And you go, right then, oh, now we need to communicate with that ship and keep in constant communication with that ship. Okay, well that's one of the comms team on like that. And oh, we need to communicate with our allies. We're going to have 3 allies in this battle, so we need to be talking with all of the allied flagships as well. So we need a comms person dedicated to that role, comms person dedicated to that role, comms person dedicated to that role. Start to see what's happening. Got all these people. Now, in battle, a captain of a ship, I'm going to use the naval ranks here, naval sort of the titles of the roles. You are going to need, the captain's going to want his engineer to be focused on giving him an assessment of his ship. But a flag officer is going to need to know the engineering status of all his ships and his allied ships, and he's going to need an engineering officer of quite a lot of experience to be able to give him that assessment. Or her that assessment. It makes a difference. It makes a difference to the number of personnel you need. You need that ranking in there. And again, this is the point of, I know this is science fiction. I know this is a made-up world. But again, they get so they're talking so close to reality. They're using so many of the realistic things that they need to be discussed in that terms, and they need to start looking at it in terms of realistic terminology. And it's not as if they didn't have characters around who could have fulfilled those roles. Let's be honest. If you told O'Neill, 1L, not 2, that he could go off and become commanding officer in space with a flagship rather than being in charge of Earth Command, you probably wouldn't have seen him. He might well have taken Carter as his flag captain, but he would have been in space before you said wobba. Next we go to the 302s, and this is another reason why I think the 650 makes more sense. Width, length of 14.26 meters, width of 26.17 meters. Now let's consider this in comparison to modern carrier fighters. And when I say modern, I'm going to go with modern, the most sexy of the most recent carrier fighters to feature in the cinema, and that would of course be the F-14. I'm sorry, it's just prettier than all the others that have flown since. It just is. So the F-14 had a length of 19.13 meters. So yeah, the 302's a bit shorter. Wingspan 19.54 meters in full extension, so that's a lot thinner. And you must remember the Tomcat can sweep its wingspan, so it can go back to 11.64 meters, which is going to make storage kind of interesting and a lot easier. Height for a Tomcat 14.9 meters. Height for an F-302, 5.92 meters. Okay, you're going to need a double, if not triple height flight deck for this one. As in 3 decks high flight deck. Probably 3 decks high. So probably going to be about 15 meters space. Engine units. 2 jet propulsion engines, 2 aerospike boosters, and a rocket booster. A Nacadria powered hyperspace window generator. Cool. Then we get into the interesting things of, we can skip for everything, but 4 wing-mounted long-range AIM-120A air-to-air missiles. Really? 4 Mark 9 nuclear missiles, optional payload, probably in the anti-ship role. Well, that's sensible. 2 nose-mounted railguns, very good. Still not sure about the AIM-120s. I'm sorry, but seriously, there are all sorts of other missiles to go out there for, and it would... There is the AIM-54 Phoenix. That is probably a better one to go and start off with and do a modified space version Phoenix than the AIM-120. And that had a solid propellant rocket motor. And a top speed of, well, Mach 5 for the AIM-54A and Bs. Semi-active radar homing and terminal phase active radar homing. That all seems rather more capable than the AIM-120 for space mission. But we'll leave that to one side. The first time you really see the F-302s being sort of put into action as air defense fighters, a defense of their ship, on really being discussed, is with the Korolev and her death. Now, she is the third of the 304s, and she's given to the Russians. All those who think that this is where it's really left history. In nicest way, I think if in reality the Russians would have been given probably something which looked like that. Not the big sexy beast. I know, again, this is a nice world where everyone's playing nicely, and they've remembered there's an existential crisis and threat to the Earth, and therefore and humanity from an alien species, so they're actually pulling together. I'm not convinced that would actually happen these days, but you never know, it might. I think we would need both a hero and a villain to unite us. Anyway, leaving that to one side, she is destroyed in combat at the Battle of 3Y229. She barely gets to fight. We have no idea what she'd really have been used for, because technically she's gonna be a Russian orientated ship reporting to, so theoretically part of the Joint Command, and theoretically or reporting to the International Oversight Committee. But let's be honest, even the Russians in this universe are not that reliable. If we go by current experience, would you really be sure? Let's be honest. It's a lot of firepower. It's a lot of firepower. And it's also, again, reducing your pool of people. Because you think about that, this is your third of this class, and as I mentioned earlier, you need about a dozen to have a self-fulfilling pool of people that's going to create enough personnel coming through to crew them and provide all the skills and sets you need to internally without raiding other services. Well, you've only got 3, and you've just given 1 off to the Russians, so they're going to be raiding their services for their people, and that's put you back. It's not actually sensible. It's in exchange for a Stargate, so it makes sense in universe. But it's really, really bad from a point of view of training, force composition, force structure, and force creation perspectives. Really bad. And then she goes and gets destroyed anyway, so, yeah. Missiles. Now, the missiles are interesting. The missiles are always very, very interesting, and I do enjoy missiles. They have so much fun and potential, but let's consider the Mark III, the Mark 8, and the Mark 9. The Mark III is a simple tactical nuclear warhead. It's the most basic and conventional of them all. It appears actually in the first ever Stargate movie, and it's, wow. It's very interesting in terms of impact. The Mark 8, well, they are launched by Stephen Caudle, when he is Colonel of the Daedalus, in charge of the Daedalus, at the Wraith Hive ship, but unfortunately intercepted by Wraith darts long before, that's their fighters, long before they reached the enemy ship. However, they managed to beam a couple aboard the Hive ship and blew it sky high, so I'm fairly sure they're enhanced in some respect. But again, this is my point about launching missiles. If you're only carrying 16, and there are debates as to whether or not you can resupply them, I presume you can resupply them, because if you can't, then it's even worse, you're only carrying 16. But why are you launching 2 at a time? Why? Why? When your opponent has hundreds of darts and its own defenses? Yeah, actually fire all 16 of them and go in behind those missiles, blasting away with your rail guns to provide those missiles with cover. Might actually do some damage. But beaming them aboard the enemy hive ship really did work. And then we have the Mark 9. Now, the Mark 9 is known as the Gatebuster. It's Nequadria enhanced. It's described as by one of the lieutenant colonels in the series, Cameron Mitchell, as solely for the purpose of vaporizing Stargates and everything else in a 100-mile radius. Now we have a number of these god-awful things at our disposal, and we'll not hesitate to use them, is the full quote. Cute. However, their yield is thought to be roughly 200 to 2,000 gigatons. So let's go back in stats. The largest bomb we have ever developed so far has been measured in megatons. The bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were measured in kilotons. Kilotons is 1,000 tons. Megatons is 1,000,000. Gigatons is roughly 1,000,000,000. 2,000 gigatons. That's 1,000,000,000,000. Now, in the nicest way, when you were saying 100-mile, destroy everything within 100 miles radius, you were meaning an entire sphere of 100 miles. I mean, it's going to be 100 miles deep hole into the planet, and 100 miles everywhere around it. It's going to basically be one vaporized. Right? Because that much explosive power is going to break things. Bear this in mind when we get onto some of the weapon systems which are discussed later. Okay? When discussing certain weapon systems later, you and I, the viewers, and I, the historian, considering this all, might think they've gone a little bit OTT. Just a little. Apollo. Probably one of my favourites, because she always looks good. Despite the fact she does seem to have a bad time in commanding officers. But Abramellis was in command in 2007. We're not sure who's taken over her now. She has now been, of course, in service, with it being 2022. She's been in service for 15 years. So we presume she'd probably on her 5th, maybe 4th commanding officer, depending on how they structure it. I'd say 3 to 4 years as a time in command would probably be sensible, considering the need to keep throughput going through to generate more people with experience at lower ranks, but also to make sure your commanders are in post long enough to actually have necessary experience to run training programs and be suitable for group command. And there is some approach to a group command in that they have them grouped into the 2nd Tactical Wing and the Fast Attack Wing. Always lovely to be working in wings rather than squadrons, fleets, squadrons and flotillas. Far more sensible. Good Lord. Anyway, she takes part in the strike on the Azurans, who are the replicators, which were created by the Lanteans, the Ancients, in the Pegasus Galaxy. Not to be confused with the replicators who existed in the Milky Way Galaxy, who were probably based on someone's interpretation of Lantean technology. Now, when she turns up, and she takes part in many battles, including a battle with, a scenario where she is almost taken over by an Azuran hybrid, which is a sort of combination of nanites and living flesh, called Angelus, who, well, how do I put this politely? His own ship infects Atlantis and hijacks the Apollo, takes it out of hyperspace near a Wraith fleet, and they have to spend most of their time hiding around a gas giant with their systems offline. Always fun. Actually led to a temporary alliance with the Azuran to destroy the planet where they created the hybrid. Life works in mysterious ways. It really does. However, she turns up with not just beam weapons, but when she turns up with the Horizon weapon system, which we'll be getting to in a bit. But no, Apollo's experience is one of almost consistent wars. She is a major factor in backing up the Daedalus in the Pegasus Galaxy, and I have to say, this is probably why she does as well as she does at surviving, because she gets far more war experience far more quickly. I will say the other factor is I've noticed that whenever the programmers seem to want to produce a ship which is going to get destroyed, it's given to the Russians or it's given to the Chinese. And that's the one which is lost. The other ships come close and they get severely damaged and all sorts of things, and the Americans had already lost the Prometheus, so, everyone's losing a ship each, but they are even-handed in who loses ships. Asgard beam weapons. Possibly the most powerful and potent tool you can have, but still worthwhile keeping your missiles and keeping your railguns for, because you need your railguns for your close-in weapon system defense, and you need your missiles for delivering the sheer firepower that is the Mark 9. I do not know why you would load anything else. Why? Why? I have something which is the equivalent to 2 trillion tons worth of explosives. Yes, it's an Quadria enhanced nuclear bomb, and yes, tends to be nuclear bombs work better in atmosphere than they do in space. But the sheer explosive power of that thing, if it's probably designed to go off once it gets inside the atmosphere of an enemy ship, is going to blow that ship in half. There is no way any ship survives that going off. I mean, seriously, how? Anyway, Asgard beam weapons. Now, when the Asgard give these to the Turi, they are sort of going, ooh, these are very powerful. And they are very powerful. But again, they do depend on the power system you have with you. One of the things I find interesting is that when they're collecting 0-point modules, they collect all the ones they can for Atlanta. This is during one of the final battles to save Earth from a super hive, which is a 0-point module enhanced, Lantean 0-point module enhanced Wraith hive ship. No one thinks, let's also put some ZPMs on these things and see how much power they can put through their shields, their engines, and their beams. But that wouldn't have been as cool, because that would have been a very sensible, very simple thing to do, and would have then probably led to destruction of Super Hive, or at least its damage, which would have meant it would have been a nice, easy jaunt for Atlantis to get to Earth. She'd have been able to be prepared, maybe form up with a fleet of repaired BC-304s, which were available, and it would no longer have been a countdown to doom, would it? Anyway, Beams are capable of overloading and penetrating even the most advanced shields, and the technically is they are a narrow, high-intensity beam of superheated plasma. This makes them incredibly dangerous if you've got good targeting software and you hit the right spot. They're also graphically quite easy to really sort of put in. They do make the science fiction pow a lot easier. The George Hammond, named for a hero, and technically the 6th of the 304s. This is because I've done her as 5th, though because finding a decent picture of the Sun Tzu is more difficult than anything else. She's also part of 2nd Tactical Wing and originally named the Phoenix. Now, she was stationed at Atlantis during the conflict with Queen Death. Always fun to take on Queen Death. She's basically one of the more powerful hive queens that turn up at various points. Then none of them are nice. None of them are fun to take on. And in fact, every single one of them is very, very capable opponents. But the War with Queen Death is particularly interesting because it starts off with Atlantean cruiser being recovered. At this point, the George Hammond arrives at Atlantis on its maiden voyage. They do repairs to the cruiser, and they decide to escort the cruiser loaded with Jedi to their homeworld. Now, the Jedi are sometimes enemies, sometimes allies. It's the traditional space relationship. Now, what happens interestingly with the George Hammond? Well, at about this time, various nasty ships start to appear, including the Queen Death's hive ship, Bright Venture, along with information that the ship will be vulnerable, since it's consuming raw materials. The plan, they end up deciding to attack the ship to try and retake Rodney McKay, who has been captured. Now, the point is, while trying to do a rescue mission of McKay, they can't use the plasma beam weapons, can they? Because they will blow up the ship, so they're having to use the railguns. And attacking the hive ship with railguns only, because they've got an actual team aboard the hive hunting for McKay. They end up actually having to transport the crew off the ship because they find that McKay has been transformed into a wraith himself. And the battle goes on. Eventually the battle moves to over Atlantis, where the 304s are launched. 304s find that the Wraith ships actually have a shielding system as well, developed helpfully by McKay. And whilst 302s are used to attack, there is a whole issue going on with Daedalus and George Hammond keep interplaying and trying to fight them back. Eventually, the Daedalus is knocked out, then the George Hammond carries on the fight alone. It gets knocked out. Samantha Carter, who's in command of the George Hammond, one of the veterans of SG-1, orders the ship to be evacuated. As the ship's being evacuated, the Daedalus comes back into the fight, and with the lovely Wraith ship distracted by the Daedalus, Samantha Carter managed to fire, with the last energy in the ship, focusing everything on it, to fire the railguns into the undefended aft of the enemy hive ship, which destroys it. Yay! Railguns for the win. What they should have done is just launch a Horizon weapon system. Seriously. Here's the thing. Right? Why do you then develop a special bomb that you have to use as a bomb to drop 6 of these missiles? 4 decoys and 6 with Mark 9 tactical warheads. Now, let's remember again 2,000 gigaton. 2,000 gigaton warheads. They're going to drop 6 of them on a planet. I know they are trying to destroy a target, and they are very successful in the TV program in actually destroying the target. But the reality is, if you're dropping that much firepower on a planet, the planet will cease to exist. Okay, there might be large chunks of it left, but that is going to crack its... That is going to crack it. It is going to crack it. Even if you're doing it on the minimal level, it's going to do so much damage that, yes, I know they are artificial AI life, the replicators, but still, there aren't going to be many of them left alive. There isn't going to be much left alive on the entire planet. Nuclear winter eat your heart out. It's one of those classic things. The only solution in science fiction is a weapon which is dramatically massive overkill. And, oh, by the way, you could have done it anyway by just launching the missiles you already have on the ship. Why do you need to carry a special bomb, have to go through a load of very special sort of arrangements, etc.? Just fire your own missiles. Yes, we can go, well, we are, we're using this special bomb because it will glide in and won't be... No, you're already fighting a massive space battle to get there. If the enemy aren't distracted by that massive space battle going on, then no amount of we're using a free-fall guided instrument to turn this into sort of some MIRVs coming in is going to make life any better. It just isn't. So, complete shit list according to Memory Delta. Now, I find this list interesting. There's, of course, the Sun Tzu here. Sun Tzu is another vessel lost in battle. Does a really good point in battles, but doesn't survive them. But what I like about this is it does give you an idea of what likely is to come next, because Phoenix makes sense. Tria, Orion, not quite sure about. Aurora, presumably the second Aurora is because the first one gets destroyed. The Janet Fraser, named for another hero. The Jacob Carter, named for another hero. Elizabeth Weir, named for another hero. Churchill. Now that's rather an interesting one, because if there's a Churchill, or even a Winston Churchill, I'm wondering where the British and the French, i.e. the other United Nations Security Council member states' ships are. Because there's been one made for the Chinese, one made for the Russians. Where is the one for the British and the French? You would want to build up a significant number of them. The interesting thing is, if we consider the Aurora getting lost, Sun Tzu, Korolev getting lost, you therefore have 4 from the original batch. 4, 6, 8, 10, and 16 possibly overall. The tertiary names I'm going to take less seriously. 16 is about the level at which you can start generating force. You can start generating good capabilities, and occasionally operating in pairs as more than just an emergency. At 16, you can probably keep 2 in the Pegasus Galaxy. You can probably keep 2 in Earth orbit, protecting Earth, and you probably have got another 4 wandering around on solo missions wherever they need to be, with the remaining 8 divided between those going through maintenance, upgrade, refit, training, working up, and a group which are sitting there ready to be called upon when you need them to rapid reaction force. That makes about sense. The thing is, the odds are you end up needing to keep about 2 of those ones which are in refit repair, probably in the Pegasus Galaxy, especially if you have Atlantis there as a forward operating base. But there again, of course, Atlantis ends with the Atlantis being back on Earth, so whether or not anyone would actually allow that to go back to the Pegasus Galaxy is a different matter, because once you've got that firepower sitting on Earth, does anyone in Earth want to lose that defense of Earth? Yes, we'll talk about honor. Yes, we'll talk about, oh, but we have a duty to them. Yes, it's the best system we can send back there. But the reality is, no. Maybe they build a BC-305, which is even bigger, more powerful, and that becomes the flagship in the Pegasus Galaxy. Anyway, they do get significant battle experience, but the thing is, in the major battles, they don't always do that well. In B3Y229, Korlev, of course, is lost. And in this scenario, you have Korlev arriving to join the combined fleet, which has Hatak motherships from the Lucian Alliance, and from the Jafar Nation, and from the Tok'ra, who are sort of an offshoot of Gwald, who are who are good, theoretically. They're definitely not bad, but, you know, being good is a different term. And there's even an Asgard vessel there. The thing is, you even have Lucian Alliance vessels turn up there as well, who are definitely an interesting group of people. But the thing is, even with all that, you would expect there to be an admiral or that sort of level and their staff there, because you are not just doing the actual fight. You're not just fighting the battle. You have to be coordinating with other people. You have to be working with them. You have to be thinking it through. I'm expecting a captain, and this is something which Star Trek does so often, it's so annoying, to be both commanding and fighting their ship, and dealing with all the issues they're dealing with on their ship, and also running a battle in terms of allies, and coordinating them once you're at more than a couple of ships level, is absolutely absurd. If we consider even the navies in World War II, when you're talking about officers in charge of destroyer flotillas, they'd have a more senior XO, so pretty much the XO could run the ship in battle, if necessary, if they needed to concentrate on their job. And B, they'd have extra staff there to support them with doing it. And that was for the lowest level of fleet fighting unit. Definitely not a battlecruiser. Definitely not something with that amount of firepower. So, yeah. Realistically, and this is being realistic, I would expect, if I was setting these ships up and in these formations, I would have one. What would I do with them? Would I be in 4s or 8s? I'd probably go with 8. Now, in naval terms, I'd be going with a Vice Admiral, Rear Admiral, and 2 Commodores, but in United States Air Force terms, that's a Lieutenant General as the squadron commander in charge of all 8, or whatever you want to call it. A Major General in charge of the second group of 4. So basically you have it divided out, it divides down into sort of Lieutenant Generals in total command, but that's all 8. But he'll lead a division of 4 personally, and a Major General will lead the other division of 4, and that'll divide down into pairs, which will be led by a Brigadier and a Brigadier, and all the ships will be commanded by a Colonel. because that makes sense, and also provides you with insurance should you start losing people, which you will in space. People will die. They will. In the battle versus the super hive, again, we have an experience where, if think about this thing, if this ship is 225 meters long, that thing's scary. If this ship is 650 meters long, that thing up there is freaking phenomenally scary. But again, it shows the advantages of these systems and their hyperdrives, that they can take a Lantine and 0-point module being plugged in rather a rudimentary way and go and make use of it, because the hyperdrive is that powerful. This takes a year to adapt to it and grow to it, because it's a different form of technology type. It's a different technological basis. And even then, can't adapt to it quickly. Now, in the battle, Stephen Caldwell, who's in charge of Daedalus, froze everything. Everything they have at it. Everything they can. Apart from the fact is, they don't have 0-point weapons, and let's be honest, they don't have a whole load of puddle jumpers aboard with drones, which are the Lantine weapon system, which is more like a torpedo than a drone. Please note, it's more like a torpedo. And eventually those weapons will be fired by Atlantis in their largest versions, and Atlantis, of course, a city ship, and that will destroy the super hive. But here's the thing. They go and get 0-point modules for Atlantis to really power it. No point did they think, let's go get a ZPM to put in this thing, to boost up its beams, to boost up it. That would have made a lot of sense. Given it stronger shields, everything. I realise it's science fiction. I realise they are working for a script and it doesn't always have to be logical, but there is a small issue going on there. You have these very powerful ships, you built them. All you have to do is give them decent engines. In fact, hunting down 0-point modules for my BC-304s would be probably my, and Atlantis, let's be honest, would probably be my number one priority. Everything else would have been secondary. One of the interesting things I found in the whole thing that went on was, when you consider when they get these 0-point modules, they get them because a Wraith who had been partnered with them in the destruction of the Azarans, who were the replicators in the Pegasus galaxy, who had been created by the Lanteans who had originally come up with the 0-point modules. It's the Wraith who go do a commando raid to go and steal the ZPMs as the attack's going in. Yet, the entire foundation of Stargate is around these Stargate teams, these commando units, in many ways, going out and doing information gathering and getting resources and getting... Why didn't anyone think, hang on, we've got some puddle jumpers, we'll put them on there, they'll cloak in, we'll send in a couple of dozen of those, we'll stick up some ZPMs for ourselves. Because if they had, then this would have been no threat. This would have been a case of, oh, you've got a super hive, oh, don't worry. Oh, cute. Well, all our BC-304s have 0-point modules as well, and all of them have shields, and all their shields, etc., are enhanced by it. In fact, we have so many. We have a pair of ZPMs in every single BC-304, and we have, all three stuck in the Atlantis, plus some spares stuck in Atlantis, and we have some more back home, powering our chair and all the defense systems. Yes, the drones and all the Lantean weapon systems are controlled from a chair. Whoever designed this idea was an absolute genius. Designed from command your weapons from a chair. Brilliant. One small issue. It's designed to be a brilliant system where you control everything through your mind and all these things. Small issue, just a small one. It's putting all the pressure on one person. Yes, they're super smart and they're getting all the information provided them, but it's putting all the pressure on one person. The first thing we learn in war is that it's good to distribute things. So, summary. These ships are really cool. They're really, really good. And this is going to be a really long video. I don't apologise. I really like these ships. I really like everything they've done. And I really like everything they represent. I know for some very good science fiction, they are the starting point because they do represent this idea of sensible development of human space for capabilities. Yes, I know they have the hand wavium or the hyperdrive, which we get from the Asgard. But they at least make sense of that. They are very powerful systems. They don't chuck away technologies. Every time they encounter a new race, they don't immediately go, "Ooh, your technology's better. We'll just take everything from you and we'll get rid of all ours." No, they implement it sensibly. They integrate what gives them a true benefit. They disregard what doesn't, and they think things through. I've often not been quite sure why their top of them looks like quite so much like an aircraft carrier. It really does. It's got a tower. The tower is even off center, and it's just probably the rule of cool. It is probably the rule of cool. But there's also potentially the option that that space could be used for ships to land and dock with them. But, yeah. There are issues with them. As said, the dispute over their length is something which shouldn't really be there. The disputes over where or not where the bridge is something which should have been worked out early on. The discussions and various things of the internal shots, which I haven't done pictures of, suggest a very spacious interior, which is sensible, but sometimes the routing really doesn't make sense. But there again, that's all things which have to be done to give you good cinematic, good camera work. Sometimes you have to adapt corridor designs and corridor angles to the cameras needed to go in them to capture the scenes, and you accept it because you enjoy the universe. They are ultimately well-balanced ships. They really are. And next week we return to the active class, who are more traditional fare. But yes, I couldn't resist finishing with this render. Sorry about the wobble. This class is a well-built, well-designed, well-thought-through evolution of something to fit a need. Wherever they turn up, they have to be the big, powerful ship. They have to be the warship that's going to turn up and make the point, because the Earth, in this scenario, the Tauri, are starting from behind. Yes, they have made themselves a name in the Milky Way. Yes, they have been using the Stargate successfully. No, they have not become a major power overnight. They've come up there hard. But having these ships and having them as powerful as possible is necessary. One of the interesting things is that when they have one or two ships, they're still pretty darn powerful. I'm always surprised that other powers do not attempt to use their superiority in numbers, especially with attacks, which are not necessarily as capable vessels, but not incapable vessels, to overwhelm them. There are scenarios where that looks like it's going to happen. But they have capabilities, and they manage to pull themselves through, and the Asgard shielding especially is really helpful. The fact that they are built with these technologies as part of them, rather than upgraded to it later, means they have capabilities. It means they are actually viable. They are very powerful ships. Very good cruisers, but ultimately they are battle cruisers because they have to be. Because turning up with just a cruiser, i.e. a Prometheus level vessel, is not enough. You need to turn up with a group of those. And realistically they should keep producing vessels of that size as well as vessels of this size, so they have a mixture. Because you can probably build about 3 of those vessels for every one of these you build. But, again, this is science fiction on TV. It's hand-wavium. Alright, what have we got coming this week? We've got the Battle of Navarino. Oh, that's going to be fun. Alright, take care everyone. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. And sorry if the music didn't work. I did try. Take care. Thank you very much for all your support. I wouldn't be able to do anything I do without it. So thank you, take care, and I always end these videos with a question, and I'm not going to forget to end this one with a question. So I've done some Stargate, some science fiction. If we look back, we've done Andromeda, and we have done Enterprise, and now we've done the BC-304s. So, what I would like you to think about is a list of ships in movie and television science fiction that have carried out, been used as a cruiser, and what they've done. Also, I think did the Venators, didn't we? I seem to remember doing the Venators of Star Wars. Or are they not on this list? Did I just do them as an extra one because I fancied doing the Star Wars technologies? Yeah, I did the Glorious Heritage of Systems Commonwealth. Yeah, I think I just did the Venators just generally. Yeah. Thank you very much, and I'd love to see, as I said, I'd love to hear what you think of in terms of our space cruisers. I'd love you to put through what you think. If you would make changes also, another question is, if you would make any changes to design, what would you do? What would you add on? How would you adapt the Daedalus class? Thank you very much. Take care. Thank you for your support. Wouldn't be possible without you. Take care.